commerce student at Queen's University and currently runs the analytics department for the Queen's men's hockey team, and sits directly in the coach's office providing various forms of data to the coaching staff. Miles grew up in Toronto, has been a Leafs fan his whole life, and still plays intramural hockey at the university, where he plays on a team called Loops Troops in the honor of LTIR.
Just getting it set up, sorry, I have a new version.
The parlay. Oh, but the music apparently was tuned perfectly to the power going out.
I can do the old version also. Is that okay? Yeah, it's not much change. Yeah, it's all the same track. Alright, just while they're setting it up, I'm going to get started here. So, as Josh said, my name is Miles Hoken. I'm from Toronto, Ontario. And today my presentation is going to be on using analytics as part of a coaching staff and informing the coaching staff on various statistics like control entry percentage and shot locations. And also my experience a little bit talking to players about it, as that was one of my roles with the team, was presenting to the players as my game reports were filed down to them eventually. But first I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. So my history in hockey starts with playing like a lot of other people. I was part of kind of an unconventional hockey family. My dad played when he grew up in Kingston, and my mom only heard of field hockey, being from South Africa. But all three of my sisters played as well, so we're definitely a hockey family. We're big Leafs fans, or at least I am. They've kind of given up hope. But then I really got into hockey analytics after a really, really impactful event, which was when the Leafs lost a game fair and square to the Boston Bruins, and we'll just forget about that in Game 7. But then I kind of realized at age 13 at the time that maybe there was something going on under the behind the scenes, another layer that I wasn't seeing, and I really wanted to get into it and started to analyze the statistical side of it. So I started a blog when I was 13 years old. Luckily, that's gone with my old high school email account. It's all deleted, thankfully. There were some pretty hot takes. You can forgive me, I was 13 years old. But I kept going in hockey. I worked for a team in grade 11 in social media just to learn the business a little bit. I worked for the Don Mills Flyers, so that's the team Jack McBain, who's a current draft eligible, played for. And I kind of got a look at the business side and meeting some cool people. And then in grade 12, I worked for my high school for the hockey program there, doing some analytics, various statistics I would take, including the zone entries like you're about to see. And then I got into my role with the Queen's hockey team. So I currently study commerce there, and I'm in my first year with the team. I learned statistics mainly actually kind of like Garrett through biology. I took biology to a pretty high level until some dissection attempts, and I kind of realized that maybe it wasn't the field for me and I should just stick to hockey. So today I'll be discussing my work with the team, from how I track data, how it's used for coaching purposes, and really, everything I do with the team. So first, despite the reputation it gets, U Sports hockey is a really good, fast-paced style of hockey, highly skill-based. The skill level has been rapidly increasing to a point where I'd say a lot of OHL players couldn't play in U Sports, and that's partially due to the age difference. But you'll recall that the Canadian World Junior team who won gold played against the U Sports All-Star team for 2 exhibition games, and they actually lost both of the games, which I didn't find that surprising, because looking at the U Sports roster, it's full of guys who are really, really impactful players in the OHL and then decided to go the school route. The U Sports teams also play NCAA teams, D1 teams in the preseason, and the games are often split, so it's definitely getting to a really high level now. Players typically play their OA year in the CHL or even in a junior A league sometimes, and then they decide to go the U Sports route if their pro options are somewhat limited, And it makes more sense for them to go the U Sports route because they get a year of school paid for every year they play in the CHL. So it makes more sense to go that way instead of playing, say, a few games in the ECHL and losing that opportunity completely. So it's becoming a really popular route for players. So because I'm originally a bio guy, here's a trophic pyramid to kind of see how recruiting goes. For Queens, since we have higher admissions averages than some other universities in our division, we have a slightly smaller pool to choose from. And also, since we're in Kingston, all the players have to be Tragically Hip fans, and if they're not, then that's a really big problem. Luckily, we haven't had to address that, but if we did, we have to pass up on a couple players. Some really big recruits of ours for this year were drafted to the NHL, actually. Pat Zambito to Dallas, and then Jaden Lindo to Pittsburgh. And Lindo's actually a winger with a pretty good shot, so if you see someone new scoring 30 goals with Crosby, it's probably him in a few years. You heard it here first. And yeah, so we have a pretty exciting crew for next year that I can't really talk about, but that's how recruiting goes in general. So how do we use analytics? When I first stepped into Coach Gibson's office to meet him after exchanging emails on the subject all summer, we were going to use an iPad application to track stats, but I was able to convince him that although there would be more stats available per se, they wouldn't be of the utmost quality because of the lagginess of the app and also the emphasis it put on certain statistics, like hits, for example, that I didn't really think were that important, and he agreed actually because he's a big fan of possession in hockey and possession metrics. So I showed him my samples from high school, I showed him my controlled entry graphs and what I thought I could do for him, and he was really impressed, and he decided to take me on as a coach pretty much on the coaching staff. So I go to games, I give him input between periods and after the game, before the game, and everything like that. So I track the controlled entries, generating high danger shots, and I also do some league analysis just for me personally to see the trends in the league, to see who's maybe getting lucky, although in U Sports that often doesn't matter because if you think you can ride a PDO streak for 82 games, imagine what's possible in 28 games, plus the playoffs. And so that was all on the coaching side, and then the league analysis I use for playoff series as well, for a playoff primer. So because none of this, not even the playoff matchups, because none of this, not even the player shot quantities, is available on the U Sports website like it is for junior teams. I have to track it all by hand. I do that all at the game live or on a live stream if the team's away and they're staying at a hotel because I don't want to cost them an extra hotel room. And then it gets put into an Excel spreadsheet which I upload to R to do my analysis. And this is an example of how I take a bunch of data from a game and turn it into a graph that goes on a controlled entry, or goes on the controlled entry report as part of my game reports to him. And the data presentation really is the most important part because I can't just show him a bunch of numbers. There has to be some sort of message behind the graphs. As we heard yesterday, it has to tell a story of some kind. So like there's the spreads on the controlled and uncontrolled entries, and they're really bright and colorful, and they kind of look like they're from a holiday cartoon or something with the red and the green. But it's really to hammer home that the controlled entries are better than the uncontrolled entries, and it's to show the players as well that if you make the extra effort to make a controlled entry, you may fail at the entry, but in the long run, you're actually 3 times more likely to generate a shot. And then we also have some ice time graphs that we gave to him. That was someone I brought halfway through the year who wanted to help out with our analytics department, and the coach really wanted to know ice time. Some shot graphs that I borrowed from Sportlogic, and then our shot graphs for individual players. So the coach can see who is trending in our team, who's getting a lot of shots, and I also give him one after every 2 to 3 weeks or so. So if there's a player not getting enough shots or below that what he's expecting, he can then go with that player, look at some things, and hopefully fix the problem. So around the halfway point of the season, I got to do some actual coaching of some kind, and I got to present this very chart to the players and before practice, and I've included the tweet here just to kind of show my concerns about showing the data so bluntly, because in high school I was actually friends with a lot of the players on the team, so I would just meet with them casually, we discuss analytics, we talk about the entries, we talk about the importance, we talk about a lot of things. One player broke a record for penalty minutes, so I had to explain to him that although it was kind of funny, that it wasn't necessarily the best strategy for winning games. And they weren't all misconducts, by the way, there were a lot of minor penalties. So I showed them this graph and included all their controlled entry percentages. There's some small sample size asterisks at the bottom, along with the team average. And this was after showing them the graph that basically showed if you're using uncontrolled entry in our league, it's pretty much not going to generate any offense, and you're way more likely to get offense with a controlled entry. And my concern was that the players don't like negative data, but I tried to frame it in the way that this isn't how you're defined as a player, and it's not all. This graph is not necessarily what I think about you as a player, but I'm able to analyze this one aspect in a pretty in-depth way. So I want you to get better at that, pretty much. And so it was kind of an interesting room to read when I was doing the presentation, because to my right, Slater Doggett at the top of the list, he's kind of looking all smug, and he's winning at analytics, kind of, and then lower to the bottom, Pat Sanvito is thinking, well, will this spike my ice time? Because he's more of a defensive defenseman anyways. So then it kind of had an interesting effect. I wasn't actually planning on showing this when I was first thinking of presenting here, but I ended up just looking at some data and kind of seeing how the players changed after that. So the higher the carrying percentage in the first half, the more the change. So you could argue that some of this is regression to the mean, because the top players and the bottom players stayed pretty similar. You can see Genovese and Doggett stayed close to the means. But then for some of the players in the middle, they actually switched places a lot. So Sanvito, as I said, he was the highest riser and he was lower to the bottom. So there was definitely some effect. But the unfortunate thing was the effect was actually to net zero. So we had 66% controlled entries in both data segments, pre and post player presentation, despite showing them that you're 3.5 times more likely to get a shot using a controlled entry. And what I found on the middle entries were, it's kind of hard to analyze them because the difference is small, and that could potentially be because most of the entries through the middle are controlled. So whether the controlled entry is affecting the results on the middle entry or the middle entry is affecting the results on the controlled entry, I'm not really sure. I need to get more data for next year. And that brings me into my limitations. So we have an extremely small sample size of 28 games to evaluate our players. We had 8 injuries at once at one point in the season, which for a team with a roster like 25, we had to call up people from the PJCHL, which I don't know if you've heard of, I had not. And we also had to dress players who were not technically playing, so I was checking some of our league prospects data, just the raw stats, and I noticed that a player who was injured had a couple more games played, and I thought, oh my gosh, do we have to dress a guy who wasn't technically playing? And then that brings me into the next step. So I'm in a unique position where I started doing this in first year because all the analytics people graduated conveniently before I came here, and they didn't really leave too much in terms of infrastructure that I could use this year to help out the coach. So building the stats year to year is going to be huge, especially the progression of some of our younger players. There's definitely the expectation that the younger players will progress through their time in U Sports, and that's pretty typical. But also reinforcing our learning with Stiva. So I'm going to touch on that a little later. But first I'm going to talk a little bit about building a program. So this is Coach Gibson, the head coach, a guy I really look up to, really respect, and he started about 13 years ago with the Queens Gales, and as you can see, they had 4 former CHL players, and now we're at the point where we have 23 former CHL players, 21 of which are actually regulars in lineups. We have former CHL captains, Memorial Cup champions, and that really comes from some big additions along the way. So Kevin Bailey was a really big one. He has finished his 5th year. He's a law student now. Some of the Florida Panthers guys might know Spencer Abraham. He's a really fantastic player. His transition play is amazing, and he was a big addition at the time. You also might recognize him from the CBC feature on the CHL lawsuit. He was pro CHL. And then Slater Doggett, our first line center, bona fide, and really scores amazingly in all my metrics. And that comes through a lot of hard work on his part and being really committed to the program, but also through the overall quality of U Sports. It's becoming a really, really attractive development route. It's no longer just a burnout league where a guy may play 4 years and then all of a sudden career over, let's get an actual job. They'll go into pro, and then we're seeing with Derek Ryan, Joel Ward, that players can actually make the NHL now. And there's also way more NHL picks. We recently played against Concordia. They had a Vancouver Canuck draft pick, Carl Neal. So how am I building the program? So first of all, it starts with a lot of people, as Garrett was talking about. We need more people tracking data because I can't track it all. I also have to maintain a class schedule, and unfortunately, I can't do hockey full time. So the tracking gives people an opportunity to work in hockey. That was one thing I just always wanted to do when I was younger, whether it was like making puns on a Twitter feed in grade 11 or like, you know, just doing anything to help a hockey team. I really wanted to get involved. So this gives the opportunity for people to do that. We have 5 people next year who are going to be helping me track data, and then 2 computer engineers actually who are really interested in the kind of back end side of it and behind the scenes. So they're going to be able to have an opportunity to show their skills and hopefully, you know, come to Ottawa Hack or even Van Hack one year. And this gives me a little bit more time as well to learn our program Stiva, because that's going to be a big part of how we coach the players. We're linking our ice time tracking and our video tracking next year. So after the game, I can go through the computer program, I can clip individual player shifts. So then instead of showing a player that a controlled entry is valuable, which I've done, and showing them their place, I can also show them how to improve instead of giving very generic examples of a time where you may not want to dump in the puck. I can actually show them specific times when they should have done that, and that way we can have more positive player interactions so the data isn't negative, it's just a way to improve. And also we'll be able to track way more areas of the game. With the amount of people I have, we'll be able, instead of showing the coach shot reports after each game, we'll be able to show them game score reports, which includes, you know, a lot of per 60 stuff as well, the shots, locations, hopefully some heat maps as well, and really just building a huge database and repository of statistics that he can go to look at, but also more ones that I can show to him and give input, because I gave a lot of input this year, but building trust with a coach is a really underrated part of hockey analytics. You can't just go in with all these crazy ideas like, I'm going to put 5 forwards on the power play. I was joking with Cam yesterday. We're going to put 6 forwards on the power play. You know, pull the goalie, and you can't have 2 guys below the line, and you can't do all these crazy things immediately. You have to build trust with the coach, and maybe it starts with a slight adjustment this year, or, you know, preaching the controlled entries. But then eventually we'll get to the point where I'll have enough data to back up certain recommendations, and while also having, you know, his trust. And he's been really accepting of analytics, and that was a big goal of his this summer actually, was to get into analytics and have a piece of it, because as he says, you know, possession is everything in hockey to him, and any play that can drive that. We're also working on an OUAE like recruitment model pretty much, because the big struggle is how do you weight an OJHL point versus an OHL point, which is where most of our players come from, or even a CCHL point, and we want to be able to kind of find those hidden gems in recruiting. And this is the future of the program. So I call it the Hans Standard because he came here last year, gave a great presentation on his coaching and can Corsi be coached, and now he's hired by the Leafs, so that's pretty cool. And it's all about having video evidence to back up the statistics. So you can upload all these player shifts, these player events, and have them look at it and even send it to their mobile phones or laptop. We don't quite have the resources of some NCAA teams who can lend their players iPads indefinitely. They're not giving them iPads, they're just lending them for a really long time, just to be clear. But we can send them to their laptops, their mobile phones, and really have them learn from that. So those are the main takeaways I wanted you guys to have from this presentation. Is, you know, building trust slowly. The players are actually receptive to this data. A lot of them told me after the season that they really appreciated my work, which was really nice. Also might have been the effect of they were feeling kind of emotional after an OT loss in the playoffs. But yeah, it was a really nice season to be with them. We broke a record for regular season wins for our program, which was really a big accomplishment for them, especially with all the injury troubles we had. But, you know, as I say in Moneyball, it doesn't matter if you don't win the last one. So this is where you can find some of my work. I post some general OUA statistics and U Sports statistics on my Twitter handle. If you can guess which TV show I got that Twitter handle from, I'd be pretty impressed. And my email's up there. I also post occasionally some player evaluation models on my blog, which is Theory of the Franchise there. I also post a draft ranking. And really some other stuff I'm trying to get into is like modeling and some of the stuff that's more behind the scenes, so I can have the coaching know-how and also some of the managerial stuff too. So thank you very much for being an attentive audience, listening to the presentation. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to hear them. Thank you.
So questions, raise your hand whenever you're ready.
Have you tried any analytics for the goaltenders of the team?
Not really, because we're kind of in a situation where we had a clear #1 goalie, Kevin Bailey, former London Knight. He actually has a really interesting story. Like, he got cut by the Knights and was working in Eastside Mario's washing dishes, and then Coach Gibson called him up, and he's OUA All-Star. Our other goalie is also very good, but there was kind of, like, for me personally and for the coach, he wasn't really too interested in the goalie analytics because we knew what we had. Then Kevin got injured for half the season, so we played the other goalie a lot of the time. But no, we didn't really go into that. Next year we might, because we're tracking where the shots are coming from anyways, so we may as well do high danger save percentage and all that. It's just an easy thing to add into our current templates, especially since we have a new goalie coming in, so I want to be able to evaluate him. And he's a super talented goalie. It's Jack Flynn from Mississauga Steelheads. That's been public for a while, but he's only been practicing this year because of the pro restrictions coming in from the ECHL. So I'll be interested to see his performance. So next year we're going to do some of that stuff.
Yeah, you talk a lot about individual stats for your team, but do you look at other teams that you're going to start facing and kind of try to tailor a game plan going forward for those upcoming games?
Yeah, I did that a bit in the playoffs. So we were playing Concordia in the second round, and they have one player who had 60 points in 28 games. So obviously that's the guy I wanted to scout. So I watched some of his shifts. I couldn't really go into individual player stats because it's not like I'm able to watch every game, and if they have an analytics department, which I'm sure they have at least someone there, they're not going to share that with me. So that's kind of the wild card as well with U Sports. You don't really know too much about your opponents aside from their percentage of points that they got, which in his case was a lot because like 60 points is pretty ridiculous. That was the lead. So yeah, there's not too much of that, unfortunately.
Any other questions?
So last year we had I think analytics person from Kelowna talking about this issue of presenting the stats to the players, and he made the point that hockey is so fast. He said you want the players to go by instinct. So if you're saying to them, oh, watch this and watch that, maybe you can do that in soccer, but he was saying that maybe in hockey that's just going to make them overthink it. And so I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, he's sitting right behind you too, Mark. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to say, Mark was a huge help in kind of mentoring me with this presentation. It's a very similar presentation. He provided me with some stuff from the CHL that was really helpful. But I get what you're saying about wanting to rely on player instinct, but at the same time, some of these players, although they're skilled, they weren't skilled players in juniors, so they wouldn't necessarily have been taught to have a controlled entry, and some of them, the grinders in the CHL, would have just dumped the puck in. They would have been taught that. So that would be their instinct, and that's not due to their instinct necessarily, but due to poor coaching in the past, or not necessarily realizing their strengths. So, I mean, I'd say I don't really mind fighting like the player instinct or what they've done in the past, because the results are so clearly skewed towards controlled entries. Like, I'm not really here to conform to their instinct necessarily. It's all about what I can statistically prove. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Miles.
Thank you.